In this video, you're going to learn how to use the inherited widget to pass data from a parent widget to a child widget in the widget tree. You're going to learn how to use the inherited model to selectively rebuild individual widgets for performance. And you're also going to learn how to use the ValueNotifier and the ValueListenableBuilder to selectively rebuild individual widgets for performance. The inherited widget is immutable and allows child widgets to access data above in the widget tree. Now, what are the steps to create an inherited widget? First, you create a class that extends inherited widget. Second, add fields to contain data. Third, add the of method to access the inherited widget from child widgets. And fourth, add the update_should_notify method to notify widgets to rebuild if the data changed. Let's take a look at the example project. First, we're going to look into the inherited widget. Now, I've set up that we have a parent widget here, and with this darker color green, and it has two children widgets, the top child widget and the bottom child widget. And if the parent adds a new idea, the children are notified and their numbers are updated. As you can see, all the children updated with the different values. But we can also have a child update the parent widget. So if, let's say, the child gets clicked on, like the bottom child widget, you see that the parent widget was also updated. And the same from this other top child widget. So how do we create this? How do we create this effect? So first, we need to create a new class that extends the inherited widget. And in this case, I call the inherited widget page provider, extending the inherited widget. Now we can have data, so we can have fields that have data that it holds. In this case, we have an integer for number of ideas, and also a function here, an increased number of ideas, which we're going to pass in an actual method so that we can call back to the parent from any child widget, can call back to the parent and say, hey, run this method that you have and update all the children with the updated data. Now we have the named constructor here, inherited widget page provider. We of course have the key, the number of ideas, and the increased number of ideas function here. Now the important part is the of method. The of method is what a child widget is going to use. It will be like InheritedWidgetProvider.of context to get access above the tree to the parent, which will be this inherited widget page provider, to get the access to the values. So every time you click on the or tap on the add ideas, the children are using that inherited widget page provider of to access the values from the parent. The update notify method here, every time the data changes, any of those fields, the data fields, what it does, since the inherited widget is immutable, it cannot change, and those data fields change, it rebuilds the inherited widget again, letting the children know that, hey, the data has been modified and changed. Update yourself with the new data. So how do we put this together? Let's go look at the inherited widget page. So here we have one method called increase number of ideas. And we're just using the standard setState command, and we take the number of ideas that are existing and we add 1 to it. Therefore, as every time you click, it's adding another value. Now, in that Add Ideas button on the upper right, our action button, is just a flat button icon that just calls that method increase number of ideas. Now inside the body itself, we have a column that has this parent widget, and if you look down here, it's just a stateless widget that just builds a container that has text that says parent widget, as you see up here, and the text that has the number of ideas that are being added. Now let's go back up here. We have also an inherited widget page provider inside this column. And we're wrapping another column that has these two other widgets, the top child widget and the bottom child widget, if you notice here, inside of an expanded widget. But we're wrapping them inside the InheritedWidget page provider, which takes, the constructor takes the number of ideas, which is here, the number of ideas, the local field divided here, declared up here as an integer, right? We have a variable. And then the increase number of ideas method, right? You declare it as a function, and we're passing the increased number of ideas method that is declared right up here inside this widget page, InheritedWidget page. So as we wrap this inside our InheritedWidget page provider, each widget here, the InheritedWidget top page, InheritedWidget bottom page, are going to be able to access the data here by using the .of. So let's go take a look at the first one, the InheritedWidget top page, which is here in another file, and it's just another stateful widget. And we're declaring the InheritedWidget page provider, and you're going to override the did change dependencies method. When you use InheritedWidget, you don't want to put this in the init of the form. You want to do it on the did change dependencies, because every time the InheritedWidget data changes, like right here we add to it, the did change dependencies method gets rerun again, and we get the new data passed on to us through the .of method, so that our child widgets here rebuild the new value. Now let's look at the build method here. It's just a column with two fields, an inkwell button with the icons here. But look at the text. As you can see here, the top child widget, right? This is where we are here, top child widget. And inside this inkwell button on the stack, we have an icon, the light bulb, and we have another widget called the text widget here, which has the number of ideas being added. And how is it accessing those numbers? It's taking the inherited widget page provider dot the number of ideas. So it's actually getting the data in that manner. And on the tap, it's also accessing the inherited widget page provider by calling that method increased number of ideas. So that when you tap here, as you can see, the parent and any other child widgets are getting the new data and getting updated. And the value gets repopulated because the did change dependencies changes in each widget, each child widget that is listening to it. And if we look at the InheritedWidget bottom page, which is the bottom one here, it's really exact the same code. They change dependencies, use the .of method to get access to the InheritedWidget provider up on our widget tree. It's walking up the widget tree to get the data. And same thing, we're using that InheritedWidget page provider dot, and we're getting the number of ideas, the data. And the same here, it's calling the method in the parent page. The inherited model allows to selectively rebuild individual widgets for performance. First, create a class that extends the inherited model. Second, add fields to contain data. Third, add the of method to access the inherited model from child widgets. Fourth, add the update should notify and update should notify dependent methods to notify widgets to selectively rebuild if the data changed by individual field. Let's take a look at the inherited model. Now, an inherited model is an inherited widget, but the difference is that the inherited model only rebuilds selectively by the data that is changed. So if the number of ideas changes, it only rebuilds if that changes. But if you change the number of possibilities, the number of ideas do not change. So you can have selectively rebuild child widgets according to only the data that changes, which makes our rebuild method much faster. It only rebuilds the child widgets that need to rebuild when the data changes. Like the inherited widget, the inherited model extends an inherited model. So we created a class, ideas, inherited model. We have two data variables, two data fields, number of ideas and number of possibilities, both of integer. We also have the of method, and we have the same thing as the update should notify, just like inherited widget, which we're notifying each children widgets if the number of ideas changed or the number of possibilities changed. But here's what's different from the inherited widget. The inherited model has an update should notify dependent. Here, when we override this, it's saying, okay, if the data that changed by checking dependencies.contain and whatever value you have, in this case, ideas, if the number of ideas changes, here we go, then rebuild that child widget. But if only the number of ideas changed, the number of possibilities widget does not change. And the same here, we have an or statement, or update the children that if the data value that is changing is possibilities, dependencies.contains, then if the number of possibilities change, then rebuild that particular widget. So as we can see here, let's take a look at the log file first, inherited model. When the page first runs, it builds both the ideas and possibilities widgets. So let's add an idea and let's add another idea. So we added two ideas. If we take a look at the log file now, if you notice, only the idea has now been rebuilt. If you notice, the possibilities did not get rebuilt, the child widget. But if, let's say, we increase the possibilities child widget, let's look at the log file now. Only the possibilities child widget was rebuilt. This gives us excellent performance. So if we have a very complex screen or a screen that is reliant on data changing, and it could be a constant data like a dashboard, you only want to redraw the widget that has the data that is changing and not the whole widget tree, the whole page. That gives you performance when you only redraw or rebuild, I should say, the particular widget that needs to be rebuilding. Now let's take a look at the inherited model page, which is this page right here. It is a stateful widget, and we're keeping track locally here the number of ideas, number of possibilities, and also the log file, which is what you saw here when I went up into the log history. It's keeping track of the widgets that are being rebuilt. So, and when we override our init state, I'm just setting the log file to blank because we want to start from 0. And on our action button on our app bar, so when you tap it, it's just navigating to a new page called log history. And it's being wrapped by log provider inherited widget. So we're now able to use the inherited widget and also the inherited model if we want to move data from one page to another and have the child widget move up the tree and retrieve the data that it needs. Now let's look at the body of the screen. So of course we have a stack, and we have a row of these two widgets, and each widget is an inkwell because we're tapping on it as like a button. And if we look here on the number of ideas widget, it's being wrapped by a log provider. And this log provider is in the inherited widget, like in the navigation above we just spoke about in the action button. And what it's doing, it's allowing the my number of ideas child widget to access this log provider so that it records how many times it's being tapped or clicked. So let's take a look at the widget now. The my number of ideas. In order to keep it simple, I kept the widgets inside the same file, but these could be separated in a different file. In a production level app, I would separate each class into its own Dart file. So what we have is a stateless widget that in the build method, we're using the of, in ideas inherited model of, to get access to it. And then we're also doing for the log provider, we're also doing an of, so log provider that of, to get access to the log file. And every time this widget is rebuilt, we're adding it to the log file. And we're just adding what type of widget was this? Was ideas or possibilities? So it's showing you the widget type and also the number that is being increased by, which in this case, the number of ideas. Now, I also do have a print statement so that you can actually see in your terminal, in your log file, the same thing that you were watching in the log history is being put here in the terminal. I'm going to hide that for now. And then the same thing for the second widget, the possibilities. We have the second stateless widget that is doing exactly the same thing. So every time I tap on one, you can see that our log file is keeping track of that. And now let's say we tap one more idea. As you can see, only the ideas widget was rebuilt and the possibilities were not. This is excellent method to get really performance update and only rebuild the children widgets that you need to rebuild. The ValueNotifier and ValueListenableBuilder allow to selectively rebuild individual widgets for performance. Now first, create a class that extends ValueNotifier. Second, add fields to contain data defining them as ValueNotifier. Third, add methods to modify data and call the notify listeners method. Fourth, add the ValueListenableBuilder widget in the widget tree to rebuild widgets selectively if the data changed by individual field. Let's take a look at the ValueNotifier and the ValueListenableBuilder. The combination of the two together really is going to accomplish the same thing as we did with the inherited model, but this is a different approach in doing the same thing for performance, where you want to rebuild only certain widgets and not the whole page. So let's take a look and see what we have. And it's going to work exactly like the inherited model. We have the ideas and possibilities. If we look at our log file, same thing. Ideas and possibilities, each one got built the first time the page was run. And if I tap 1, 2, 3 for ideas, and let's tap 1 for possibilities, let's look at the log file. As you can see, the ideas widget was built 3 times as we tap that. Ideas inkwell. And then the possibilities widget was only tapped once. So how does this work? First, we have a class here that I declare as an idea count. And it's basically data fields, your values, your variables, which are of type of ValueNotifier. Now, I created a class, kind of like a model, to have each field, because I like to group them together. But you could easily not create a class and use the variables here, just declaring them as ValueNotifier inside the actual page that you're using. And I'll show you that in a second here. But I like to use the class, so I like to use them as a model. So I have them all organized in one place. And then to create a ValueNotifier class, what we do is we extend ValueNotifier. And of course, we're going to use the idea count class for our variables, for our data fields. And in a ValueNotifier, you're actually calling methods. As you can see here, they're both void. One that says add number of ideas, and we're passing an integer number of how many ideas you want to add it by. So what it does, if you look at your constructor first, the idea is ValueNotifier. It's a name constructor. And the idea count, which is being passed in, is The name variable is value. And with the value notifier, you actually have to use the variable value name. So if you look inside here now, when a method is called the add number of ideas, it takes the value dot number of ideas, which is coming from here from the idea count class. It's the value of that variable, take it plus or equal, which means take that number, that value of the number of ideas, and add 1, in this case, number of ideas. And then you call the notify listeners. This is what tells the child widgets to redraw. So that it's like, they're sitting there waiting. Once they're notified, oh, it's time for me to redraw. Now let's take a look at the actual value notifier page, which is this page here. And let's see how we set this up. And I'm using a stateful widget. So I'm getting an instance of the ideas value notifier. I'm also keeping track of the log again so that we can track and see which widgets get rebuilt. In the init state, I am initiating the ideas value notifier. And you can see I'm saying ideas value notifier. And then for the value, I'm passing the idea count class, which defaults the number of ideas and number of possibilities to 0. And they are declared as a value notifier and type of integer. Very straightforward. And I'm also clearing the log history so that we can keep track every time we switch a tab, we start from 0. Now, also override the dispose method, and you want to dispose of the idea value notifier. Okay, let's look at our page and see what we have. And again, the same on our app bar, on our icon here, when we tap for the log history, we have an icon button, and when on the press, it's navigating to the log history page, and we're using the log provider, of course, so that we can share data. Okay, so that the log history goes up the tree to get the log data that is happening here in this parent widget, which is the value notifier page. And we do have a stack. And let's take a look. Again, we have a row, kind of similar to the inherited model. And now what we have here is we're using the ValueListenableBuilder. And if you notice here, we have 2 of them, and there's the second one. So the first one, this first ValueListenableBuilder, is for the ideas right here. And again, we're using the inkwell, and using a stack, we have the icon, right? The ideas icon. And for the value here, if you look here, I'm actually nesting a log provider with another provider, the ideas value notifier provider, so that we can pass this down to the number of ideas child widget. So as you can see, you can also mix and match InheritedWidget, which is that provider, the ideas value notifier provider and the log provider, with the value notifier and ValueListenableBuilder. So it's a great way to use these different widgets together for state management, and it's using all the classes that are built into Flutter without relying on any third-party packages. And then on this inkwell, on the tap, we're just saying the ideas value notifier dot add number of ideas. We're calling that method, and we say add 1 to it. And if you remember, the add number of ideas is this method right here in our value notifier class, the ideas value notifier. And as we scroll down, we have now a second ValueListenableBuilder, which is for the possibilities. And again, it's the exact same setup using the multiple providers. And let's take a look at the actual child widgets at this time. So we have this number of possibilities. And here it is. So it is a stateless widget. And again, the ideas child widget, number of ideas, is also a stateless widget. So they're both exactly the same. So if we look at the build method here, we're doing the exact same things you're already used to doing. By using the .of, we're getting an access instance to the log provider. And also to the value notifier provider here, we're using the .of and getting access to it, the ideas value notifier. And then we're adding to our log history again, what is it? This is a possibility that they tapped on. And then we're also passing here the value that has been added, which brings it up to our log file. And the log file shows us that every time we're tapping this button, it's recording to the log file that this particular widget is being rebuilt. And if we look at the log file, it's showing that the last 3 taps has been the possibilities, and the idea is widget has not rebuilt. And that's the power of using a ValueListenableBuilder, which means here on this page, each one only rebuilds when the value in this ValueListenableBuilder is changed. A great way to manage your state and to optimize your page for performance. How does it work? The inherited widget is great to pass data from an ancestor widget to descendant widget. The inherited widget is immutable and the data are final, and the Flutter framework rebuilds the inherited widget to refresh with the new data. The inherited model selectively rebuilds individual widgets for performance. Now use the of method to access the inherited model from child widgets. Use the update should notify and update should notify dependent methods to notify widgets to selectively rebuild if the data changed by individual field. The ValueNotifier and ValueListenableBuilder allow to selectively rebuild individual widgets for performance. Use fields to contain data, defining them as ValueNotifier. Use methods to modify data and call notifyListeners method. Use the ValueListenableBuilder widget in the widget tree to rebuild widgets selectively if the data changed by individual field.